this is working, shoot a message in the chat if you're here. Just say hello. You know that you can hear me, which pretty sure you can, but it's always good to check. Obviously, tonight's live stream, which if you're not watching this live, you're watching this in the future. Hello from the future. But obviously tonight we're going to go about 90 minutes or so with about an hour of my presentation, and then I'll do Q&A at the end. So I see some people have floated in. Can y'all hear me? We okay? Just want to check. Everything looks okay on my end, but always good to verify. Okay, so the docket for today, we're going to cover recruiting. We'll go through different age groups. We'll talk about skills and positions and how those vary, and some like metrics and how hard do you need to throw, how hard do you need to hit the ball, all that sort of stuff. 60 times. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to not blow your budget, because I don't like people wasting money on anything, especially not recruiting. And then we'll talk about at the end, step by step, what you should do to maximize your budget, number one, and how to actually get recruited. So we'll cover that towards the end, and then obviously we'll do Q&A after that. So, all right, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. So at the end, and here's what I want to do with questions. It's if you have a really good question, it's definitely please stick to recruiting tonight. If there's like other questions about mechanics and things like that, I'm just not going to go into those. So keep it about recruiting. But if you have a really good question, either ask, I would save it till the end, because if you ask me early on as I go through this and it gets piled below, it's going to be hard to find it for me later. So you could either ask it early and then ask it again later. That's totally fine. But obviously, the more when we get to the Q&A section, I'm usually going to pick the fresh ones. We had like 150 comments of the last live stream, and it was just a little overwhelming. So I do want to answer the best questions that are going to be broad for everyone. But anyway, you can obviously ask questions, and I will stop and answer questions as we go as they're relevant. But again, like if you have like questions that aren't on the scope of the presentation, for later. Before we get going, obviously, like I support my own channel and my own endeavors through my book sales, my online course sales. Obviously, these are products I built for you. So if you help support what I'm doing and get good educational baseball products, that's going to help you as a coach or parent or kid, you can do that. Find those in the caption in the description below. This week, if you're watching live, is my Black Friday sale week. So everything I offer, my books, which are on Amazon, is 35% off. So if you're watching live, you can save a bunch of money this week. So let's start. First thing, poll, and if you want to put a comment down, you can. Do summer baseball tournaments actually attract scouts? And the answer is, not time. No, they don't really. Here's the thing with tournaments, and we'll cover this more at the end. But college coaches, they are very busy people. The recruiting coaches have a very strict schedule to stick to. And so what they do, and I know this because I've talked to many of them and asked them, I'm like, how can I get you to come watch my team? They're like, well, we need to know who's playing on your team. And if they're good and we actually want to see them and have real interest, then we might put your team on our sort of roadshow map. So this idea that like you're just going to go to these tournaments and scouts are just going to show up and find your kid or you, it's a very misguided thing. And I mean, my academy, we had our own teams and we went to all these tournaments. The only time you see scouts there, just like lingering around the complex, is 17U for the most part. Now, if you go to national level tournaments, like a really big, high profile perfect game event or PR event that's like kind of invite only, and some of the best teams in the country are there, it's a little bit different. But for the most part, for most of you listening, if you just go to this great showcase tournament, there's not going to be anyone there to watch you unless they know that you're coming and they want to see you. So that's a big misnomer. I wanted to clear that up right away. Brian, I see your question there. Let me get to that one later. So let's talk about numbers here and just in general, how many players actually go into college. I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but just so we have proper expectations set. The overall percentage, about 500,000 high school baseball players, 36,000 NCAA baseball players, and that doesn't include NAIA, so there's more obviously. And then if you break down those numbers, that's 7% of high school players going to play either at D3, D2, or D1. Those are the NCAA, obviously, divisions. So D1, 2.2%. So that's 1 out of every 50 high school players will go D1 baseball. That's not even 1 per team. That's on average 1 out of every 2 teams. And again, that might grow players in your area depending on how strong baseball is. Could be there are teams where like they're batting 61 commits, places like Hollywood, California, or like really great schools in Georgia, wherever. So it's highly variable, but just remember, only 7% go on. That's 1 out of 14 players go on to play college baseball. How many of them go on to turn pro? So that's 10% of college players. Um, and that means that's 10% of that original 2% that went on to play college. That's 0.2% of high school players will turn pro. So not a lot. Obviously, that's what's the math there? 1 in 500. Not great. I hope I did that right. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. So, but use of emojis, love emojis. Remember, statistics are not your odds. So just because it's 1 in 500, or if you're a good high school ball player, or if it's 1 in 100,000 players who are born and start playing baseball, at the youth level, even though maybe only like 1 out of 100,000 becomes a pro ball player, those aren't your odds of becoming a pro baseball player. Statistics are not the same as odds, and that's because if you're better, your odds are higher, and everyone has the same chance as everyone else. So a lot of parents, it's good to be realistic about just how hard it is to be a pro baseball player or a college baseball player. It's good to be realistic and understand how few there. But it's also important to remember that if you have the same chance as everyone else, why can't it be you? You can work harder than other people. You have some talent. Um, it can be you. And my buddy and I have talked about this. Like when he was in, my friend who pitched in the major leagues, when he was in AA, he's looking around. He's like, this isn't a 1 in 100 anymore. This isn't like 1 in a million. It's like, I just need to be better than 4 of you, and I'm going to the big leagues, right? So after a while, and he's like, I have the same chance as any of you. If I pitch well, I have the same chances of any of you up there. So it's not like as the funnel narrows and players get better and players are eliminated from the race, your odds increase, and your odds are not someone else's odds. Everyone has the same equal chance, but you make the odds in your favor by working harder and controlling what you can control and having some natural ability. So when we talk about college recruiting, the big question is, when are you ready to start, and when is it actually going to be useful? Because that's the big thing. Because if you listen to college, or if you listen to recruiting companies, they want your money. And it's not to say they do a bad job, but they want and need your money because they need to pay people and keep the lights on. That's how businesses work. So they can be as honest as they want to be, but at the end of the day, they're not going to down your money if you want to start doing recruiting at 13, even though they probably know that to be completely relevant, a useless waste of your money. So you just have to understand that if you have an unlimited budget, no big deal. If you have a limited budget, which pretty much everyone has a limited budget, and one of my friends who runs a academy in Chicago, he was telling me how this whole supply chain crisis is pinching everyone, including sports parents. He said his uniform costs have gone up like 30%, and he's got to pass that on. And he said, man, it's just getting really expensive to have a kid playing baseball right now. Just the equipment, all that stuff is increasing in price. So I want to talk about skills. And if you've watched my YouTube videos, I'm pretty honest, and I try to give people a realistic view of what's going on. And a lot of that time, a lot of hard conversations and finding people who will be honest with you about how good you need to be. But let's talk first about pitching velocity. So this is a little chart that I made, and then my observation, and you can have qualms with my language, whatever. But in general, I find this to be pretty accurate. And this isn't like, you can see these kind of go up by about 4 miles per hour per year, because that's what I've seen. And your town might be different. And just understand that. Let me give you an example here. So if we're talking about 18-year-olds, 88 plus, I put outlier. So if you throw 88 miles per hour as a 17 or 18-year-old, that's very not normal. It's not normal. It's more normal now than it ever has been, but it's very, very abnormal in the course of human history to be throwing a ball that hard at that young of an age. So even though there's maybe a kid in your area that throws 95 or even 98 or even 100, and they are out there, it's still not normal for them to do that. And even if you go down to a lot of D1 programs, including my alma mater, which is a competitive-ish low D1, or down the street from me at George Washington University or Georgetown or George Mason, if you go watch one of those D1 games, GW, G Mason, G Town, you're going to see kids throwing 87 to 89. They'll have a couple kids that can throw 90, but by far the most kids on those teams throw in the upper 80s. These are D1 players. So just remember, it's still not normal to throw 90 as a high schooler. So I just want to keep expectations realistic. Obviously, the big thing with velocity, especially when you're young, is that it's more about your developmental age than your actual age. So you could be a 15-year-old and be 6'5", 230 pounds. You could also be a 15-year-old and be 5'6" and 112 pounds. They're both 15-year-olds, and unfortunately, the kids develop faster who just have an 18-year-old's body at 15. They just sort of win the genetic lottery, and they're going to get scout attention sooner. You can't control that. I've talked about that in other videos for sure. But remember, everyone sort of starts to catch up at like 18 to 21, where bodies normalize. Like you don't see kids who are just like bigger than other kids unless that's how they're actually built. In college, everyone hits puberty and they're pretty much done growing by like, right? So, but in high school, kids are still widely different in where they are in their growth stage. So here's the thing with this. You're going to start to get recruited if you're under one of these red lines. So if you're 15, you're throwing 84, you throw super duper hard. If you're 15, 16, you're over 86. Again, you're one of the hardest throwers. And I was talking to a D1 coach a couple years ago. We had a kid who was 84 to 86 in his freshman. So after his freshman that summer, so before he was a rising sophomore, and he was one of the hardest throwers that coach had seen in the entire state of Illinois. He's like, there just aren't that many kids who can throw a ball 80, 85 or better. It's just really rare. So when you're in this outlier group, you can start the recruiting process a little bit earlier, but that's not to say you're not going to get there eventually. And again, I know everyone like poo-poos 80 miles per hour. 80 miles per hour is still hard. Like you can't have bad mechanics and like 80, it's not easy for a human to throw a ball that hard. So I'm not going to too much longer, but this is a general idea of how hard you need to start to throw to get recruited and to move on to play college baseball. Somewhere in that red, maybe into that yellow if you're a lefty, or if you're a little crafty, really ability, you can get somewhere, probably a junior college, around 80. Let's talk about exit velocity. This is swing off a tee. So this is not thrown. This is just ball on the tee. You hit it with your sports bat. And these numbers are not super important, but they're generally useful in saying how much pop does a kid have. I've met a lot of college coaches that don't track this. They don't take a radar gun to look at kids. Like, how would they? This isn't going to be something they really track in the game. A lot of them, it just depends or not. But it's something to show, like, hey, I've got some bat speed. They do this obviously in recruiting profile videos, all that stuff. It's an easy way to quantify that, hey, I can swing the bat hard. So if you're above 90 in your high school career, you're doing really well. That's hitting the ball quite hard. Pro guys hit the ball around 100. Smaller guys, maybe mid 90s on average. But, if you start to look at exit velocity stuff that they show on StatCast on MLB games, you see how important bat speed obviously is. And if you start to do the math, because you get about 1 mile per hour of exit velocity for every 5 miles per hour the thrown baseball travels. So if Aroldis Chapman throws a pitch at 100 and you connect with it, you're getting 20 miles per hour from the energy in his ball plus whatever's in your bat if you square it up perfectly. So if you swing 100 and you hit a 100 mile per hour fastball square, theoretically it's going to go 120 off your bat. I learned that equation from Dr. Alan Nathan, who's the baseball physics guy. What's up, Porter? Miss you, man. And so again, like this is where you start. If you want to start hitting home runs, you need to hit the ball about 100 to get it over the fence. For the most part, you can squeak some over sometimes in the low 90s, but in general, about 100 to get it out. The bigger parts of the ballpark. So if you start doing the math, throwing 80 miles per hour, you'll get 16 miles per hour of exit velocity. That's 80 divided by 5, plus your 90 mile per hour bat speed. That's going to go off to about 106. If you hit it absolutely perfectly, that's going to be a dinger, right? So anyway, this is somewhat useful just to give you an idea of how hard you're hitting the ball, et cetera, et cetera. Speed. This one's also important. Obviously, if you're a bigger kid, this is going to be a little less important, but you got to hit the ball hard. So if you're a corner infielder or you're a catcher, obviously first base, third base, or catcher, these aren't going to apply to you quite as much because they're not going to demand that, a catcher runs a 7 flat. But if you're an outfielder or you're a middle infielder, this is going to be important to you. I say that 60-yard time is irrelevant at 15 and below because kids are still growing, and a 15-year-old kind of still goofy who's more of a boy than a man, they just can't run the 60-yard that fast. So comparing, a 15-year-old 60 time to like the standard of 60 times, which in general 7 flat and below is good. You just like can't like you can be a fast 15-year-old and not run a 7 flat. Like that's really fast. So I don't put much stock into 60 time below 15 years old. So I really wouldn't worry about it too much. Just is he faster than his peers? That's important. Like fast when you see it. But I wouldn't worry too much about 60 time because you could be a fast 14-year-old and run like a 7.5. That's kind of fast for a 14-year-old. That's kind of my point. It doesn't work on like the adult scale. The 60-yard dash is like an adult scale. So down here, 7.5, 7.4. You definitely want to get to 7.2. That's where you're like clearly athletic and can move. And now, obviously, if you can get to 7 flat or below, you're doing a good job. The big league average is a 6.8. And of course, what people forget is that the big league average size is 3.220 or 230. So that's a big dude running a 6.8. If major leaguers were smaller, like Billy Hamilton size, like if you saw like Bryce Harper can run a 6.8, and Bryce Harper is a well-built guy, right? So if you trimmed him down, he'd probably run a 6.6 or 6.5. I mean, again, to get that much mass moving is fast. So keep that in mind that these are really big, strong, powerful grown men playing college and pro baseball. But again, getting to 7 flat or below is pretty good. If you're running a 7.2 as like a 16-year-old, college coaches are gonna be like, okay, that kid's he can move. He moves well. That's fine. Like, and they know you'll get faster every year. So let's talk more about size and position. Obviously, this is important because you can't be a little kid. That's the big, and this is part of the takeaway later. Not wasting your money is that if your son still looks more like a boy than a man, huge, like just put the brakes on recruiting because there's no point. So you really have to get to the point where, and now don't misunderstand me, they do sign some kids like out of the Dominican, sign some kids out of the US who are like still like more boyish. Like Derek Jeter, if you looked at his recruiting video, he was a pretty skinny kid. But these are kids who are clearly premium athletes. So there's a little bit of a difference. But in general, for the vast majority of kids who aren't super athletes, um, 155 pounds isn't going to get you super far in the recruiting process. For most kids, you want to get at least to 180 pounds, pretty much regardless of your frame. So again, you have to project at some point. They need to say, like, can this kid be big enough to be a first baseman? Could he be big enough to be a third baseman program? Because they do project by position. So if you look at the major leagues, third basemen tend to be a little bigger, right? Like 6'2", 6'3". They hit for more power. First basemen obviously are the big donkeys. Doesn't matter how slow they are. Middle infielders a little bit smaller, but they're getting bigger, just like everyone else is in baseball. And so, the position stuff, it's obviously important. They want to see, like, if you're a really small, scrawny kid, you're not going to be a first baseman in college. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't matter how good you scoop the ball, how good your glove is at first base. They need to stack the biggest, slowest guy at first base to hide slow feet there so that he can hit for power because they need power in the lineup, right? Teams need to have a couple guys that can hit for power. They need to have a couple guys that can get on base a lot and steal and that stuff. Although stealing's a little less, there's a little less stealing than there used to be in the pro game. But in general, people fit those molds, or at least they try to. And so if you get to the biggest programs, especially like University of Florida, like they had Pete Alonso playing first base for them. Now, when you get to smaller schools, they're not going to have quite as big of a pool to pick from. So they might not have like a Pete Alonso type at first base. Like in my college, we had a guy who hit a lot of doubles playing first base, and he was a well-built guy, but he wasn't a 25 home run guy, right? So you start to lose out a little bit when you can't maybe find someone that fits that position quite perfectly. But in general, you want to have some utility and fit some kind of position. So again, small, you need to be fast. You need to put premium on those kind of tools. If you're big, you need to hit for power. And so just trying to figure out, like, if you're a pretty big kid and your parents are pretty big, you're not going to become this small burner type. You need to make sure you're working on some of like, hey, maybe I should play first. Maybe I should play third. I'm probably too slow to play the college, so I probably need to start tailoring things to fit me. I'm going to reuse this slide from my pitching velocity and injuries live stream from last month. If you haven't checked that out, it's obviously on my channel still. Remember, the growth is not linear, and it's a lot like waves. So I see a lot of kids hit a big growth spurt around 14, then they might plateau for a while, then they hit a big growth spurt at 16, and then another one at 18. Of course, the 18 one is a little bit too late. So this is the big one at 16. So, it's sad times when you're just kind of plateauing and your 60 times not improving, your velocity's kind of stagnating. It's like feels real sad. It's like every day is raining. And I get that. You just got to kind of do your best. And when you hit your growth spurt, you hit your growth spurt. But here's the thing, and we've talked about metrics, right? We've talked about velocity and run things you can measure, but we have to have a talk about being a good baseball player. Metrics are important. They give coaches an idea of your skills. Like if they know a kid throws 92, they're going to come out and watch him and see what he can do. But if you have good metrics, like you throw really hard or run really fast, but you have bad stats, you're not going to get that far. Or if you have bad metrics, like you don't throw very hard, you can't hit the ball very hard, but you have good stats, like you get on base a lot, you can get guys out. Either of those formulas aren't good recipes. So you have to have a mix of both. Because spoiler alert, you can't suck at baseball to play college baseball. You have to get hits and you have to get hitters out. And this is a thing that a lot of people are forgetting, unfortunately, because they're so obsessed with recruiting profiles and all this stuff. But we've had a lot of kids at my academy that they're hitting 92 off the tee, and we're excited about that. But then they go out in high school season and they hit 220 because there's not very good hitters. And obviously we worked on them and we did the best we could, and they worked hard. But you have to at some point actually be good at the game of baseball. So don't forget that. College coaches, they're going to come out if they know you can do certain things. They're going to come out and watch, but they need to see you succeed at baseball because remember, if you can only hit 260 in high school, what are you going to hit in D1 baseball? You're going to hit 160. So they know that. Like if you don't dominate high school baseball, it's going to be pretty hard for you to succeed in college. That's the honest truth because it gets, like everyone says, if you're in D1 baseball and you get drafted and you go to the pros, basically every player 1 through 9 was the best player on their D1 team. You're facing the best player from Vanderbilt in the 1 spot, in the 2 spot, in the 3 spot, in the 4 spot, all the way to the bottom. The 9-hole hitter is the best player from, University of Florida, like whatever. That's how it goes. It gets really hard to succeed because now you're facing the best players everywhere. So remember, when you're ready to show yourself, besides being actually good at baseball, you need to look like a strong kid. If they say, yeah, he's a strong looking kid, good looking athlete, good things to say. If you still look a little bit like a boy, it's just not time to spend money. And again, we'll cover that more in a minute. You should probably run a 7.2 60, 84 plus exit velocity means you pretty good bat speed for a high schooler. And in general, 80 to 84 velocity is where you can start having a useful time putting yourself out there for recruiting. Because if they see you at 16, they have a pretty good idea that you'll probably throw 86, 87 by the time you're a senior. That's 3 to 4 miles per hour a year is in general what happens. So let's go by age and talk through some of the different things that you should be doing as like a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And of course, some of these things are showcases. Should you spend on them or not? When should you start really making contact with coaches? Should you play for these pricey teams? And unfortunately, like I ran an academy and we tried to keep costs low. We still charge $2,500 a year. It's $200 a month. And of course, we were in central Illinois, so costs are a lot lower. I know if you lived out here, that'd be about $5,000 because it's way more expensive to have a facility out here. Everyone's got rent to pay and miles to and all that stuff. It's just not cheap. So, but there are different teams you could be on, and there's a certain amount you could travel or opt out of travel. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But for age 14, so this is 8th grade for most people. I know I put age. I probably should have just put grade. But here we are. So age 14 / 8th grade, you should be spending 100% of your budget on development, whatever that means to you. If your kid plays 3 sports, age 14 is still a fine age to play 3 sports. That's okay. If they only play 1 sport or 2 sports and they want to go to a baseball academy in the winter and do, training or hit for lessons, do strength training. I recommend every kid's doing strength training from 12, 13 and up, as long as they're motivated to do it. All that money should be on development. You should not spend a dime on recruiting at age 14. I mean, you heard it here first, because they're not going to recruit you and they're not going to sign you and they're not going to verbally commit you until you're 16. So I think the big thing is people think there's this list that coaches are like, oh, this kid's good at 14. I'm going to check back in on him on 2 years. They're not going to do that. Like they might have seen you before, like somehow, but in general, they're just going to go through the new, again, every year they're finding out who is good and who is ready. This is another misnomer. Like my buddy, I have friends actually who are pro scouts. They don't look at 16-year-olds. They look at 18-year-olds. Like I'm like, hey, did you go to the 16? He's like, no, why would I go to a 16U event? He's like, If they're not ready to be drafted, I'm not looking at them. I'm not wasting my time. And that's all sentiment with college coaches. They're not tracking 14-year-olds. Like they don't have a notch on your door, right? To like see, oh, he was, little Johnny was 11 when he was 9. They're not doing this. So just remember, it's not important to do any recruiting stuff at 8th grade. It's just not. I don't care who tells you that. It's not useful. It's a waste of your money. Save it, spend it on something better. Do it, put in their college fund. Don't spend on recruiting stuff. Travel team. Let me explain this. It's not important to go spend a bunch of money and travel around because it gets pricey. Like the hotels, that stuff adds up more than anything. It's not important to go on really long trips when you're 14. Don't blow the budget at this age. Now, I know you might need to get your foot in the door and get in a good organization at 14. I understand that's how that stuff works because, there's a really successful 14U team and they age up to 15U and you're trying to break into that team and they had a really good team, like you're not maybe going to be able to displace somebody. Like they have their team set. They're not just going to cut everyone and start new every year. So I understand that you need to get on a team. But my only point with this being unimportant is that you don't need to go to the PG Nationals. You don't need to go to the any national level tournament unless everyone really wants to and it's a fun thing to do. That's fine. But you don't need to spend that much money on that stuff. Age 15. Now, the reason I put 95% and 5% is because there are going to be some kids who are legitimately kind of ready to go do some stuff to put themselves out there because they might be ready at next year. So we had a couple kids, they were always outliers. We had one kid, I was on the phone with the University of Illinois, the University of Louisville, all these different schools. This freshman kid that we had one year because he was like a super athlete, throwing 85, 86 off the mound, running a 6.6. He was like 6'3", great basketball player. He was a super athlete. So it occasionally happens, but for the most part, most 15-year-olds are what? 5'9", 130, right? Again, more like a boy than a man. No one's really going to have any interest there. So for the vast majority of players who don't look like if you look like a 7-year-old and you play like a 17-year-old at 15, then this might be, you might be in that 5%. If you look like a 15-year-old, you're in the 95%. Just keep getting stronger. Parents, save your money. Put it in, if you say you're going to set aside X amount of dollars every year in high school for recruiting stuff, just put that in the piggy bank and spend it extra at 17U. Now, I will say you're 15 and you want to get your feet wet and just see how you stack up to other players. Single school camps are pretty good. You'll get like a little evaluation from the school. You'll get to see yourself in a mix of all different players and ability levels. You get to talk to some former, some college players and college coaches. It can be a good experience and they're usually low cost, like $150 or less. Typically, they're like $75 or $100. And this is like, Illinois State's baseball camp or University of Maryland's baseball camp. Kids go there and they find, you go there and you'll compete for a day or two. They'll have like an inter squad game. You'll get to throw an inning or whatever. They're good experiences and they're just a fun and just start to get warmed up at it. If you want to do that, I think that's a good low cost thing to do. I don't think you need, again, go do a recruiting profile, a $300 showcase to get all that stuff on the web because it's gonna you have a recruiting profile that says you throw 76 miles per hour. Woohoo! No one's going to be interested in that. So even though 76 at 15 is going to be 84 when you're a senior, so that's good then, but it's not good now. So this is, I think, the best thing to do if you want to get your feet wet and start just sort of getting evaluate a little bit and see how you stack up against other players your age. So I know I already gave the answer, but I did this poll the other day on YouTube. What people think is when you should start showing yourself at a recruiting camp. So for the most part, people said 80 or 84. Yeah, 82 is kind of like a weird number. But in general, it looks like 80% of people went 80 and above. And in general, that's true. If you're in the 70s, it's just not going to be useful. Like people are going to look at that and they'll say, I'll come back in 2 years, but they're not going to like put you on a list to do that again. So age 16, if you're ready, if you're one of the best kids in your county, if you're a starter and you're kind of dominating as a sophomore, you might be ready to do some recruiting stuff and you can spend the money. Because here's the thing, at age 16, the sophomore year, this is when the D1 recruits go off the board. So the absolute best kids in your county, they're going to get verbally committed after their sophomore year, right? So, of course, they can't sign their national letter of intent till the next year. So, if you're one of those kids, if you're a high school pitcher that throws 85 plus and you're pretty nasty, like you don't just throw 85, but you also can throw a second pitch for a strike and you just essentially dominate people for your age group, then this might be you. If you're, again, a big, strong kid and you're like one of the best position players anywhere, you can run that 7 flat 60, or you hit bombs as a first baseman, or you have a cannon as a catcher, whatever. If you really are one of the absolute best kids, you're definitely a varsity starter and you're pretty nasty, then this might be time to spend the money. Because if you don't, you might be missing the fact that there are some schools that might want to commit you, right? Because low D1s are going to want to commit kids just as big D1s do. So if this is when all the D1 schools have their money to spend, they're going to spend it on sophomores. So because they know if they get a sophomore that throws 86 at 16, guess what? That kid's going to throw 92 as a senior probably, unless he gets hurt or something else changes. They're looking to project kids, right? So, but at 15, it's harder because they're still so young. But at 16, they're like starting to fill out pretty well, where they have a pretty good idea. Where if you're like a 6'2", 16-year-old and you throw 85 and you're like 180 pounds, 6'2", it's not too skinny. They have a pretty good idea, right? They're going to see a lot of it. So, if you're in that category where you're legit, then spend the money. If not, save it. You can maybe do a little recruiting stuff if you want, but in general, don't cave to fear of missing out. This is the thing that hurts people. They're like, oh, well, what if someone's right? No, only D1 kids are getting signed as a sophomore. And if you're not getting signed, it's really not that important because they'll have to come see you next year. So if they're going to have to come see you next year, then wait and spend the money then. So age 17, this really is the year. And we've seen it at these good tournaments. There's a really good one in Indianapolis run by Bullpen at the big Westfield complex. Is that what it's called? Or something? I don't know. But they have a beautiful complex in Indianapolis. And that one is pretty well attended by scouts. However, even if there's 30 scouts at the complex and you see them like, oh, there's scouts at every game, it doesn't mean they're going to come watch your kid's team, because they might, again, as I talked about, they're all at that complex because a lot of really good 17U teams are going there, and they know of kids on a lot of those teams there. So they're going to spend the weekend there, see kids A, B, and C from teams X, Y, and Z. And that's why there's so many scouts around, because they're there specifically. But it's not like they're going to like just looking at random games. They do watch some random games because they're there, right? If they see, their kid play for 3 innings and they got the scouting report that they wanted, and now they're still there and they have 2 hours before another kid plays, they're going to watch some games, right? And so you could get seen that way. But in general, you'd have to do something pretty flashy to catch someone's eye like that. Or, are you on the mound at the one time the scout's free and he's watching your game? I don't know. But in general, this is why you need to be connected to a good summer organization where they're, again, trying to get you out there and say, hey, we're going to be at this tournament. And here's little Timmy who throws 88. So when we're there, you should come watch him play. Like, he's going to pitch on Thursday. Like, that's how it worked. We do with our players when we had players who were pretty good. So this is something that you need to keep in mind, that, again, they're not just going to show up out of the fog to watch your game. You need to spend the money. And again, you don't have to spend the money. I'm going to go at this at the end, but I'm saying whatever your budget is, now is the time to blow it at 17 or 18 if your kid is really good. If your kid's still not ready, if he's still 5'10" and 140 pounds and throws 77, but he's about to break through, it's not time yet. Don't waste the money if he's not there, because it's going to throw good money at a recruiting profile that's not going to be useful to him. The numbers have to be there. So remember, this is the myth. They're going to select tournaments based on who's going to be there. So even if you see scouts milling around, they're not necessarily there watching your game. 18U, obviously, ready or not, before that senior season, you've got to get in front of people. So for kids who just still aren't ready, the goal is to work really hard through the summer, train a bunch in the fall, and then go to a bunch of showcases in December, January, February for unsigned seniors. And there's always schools looking for guys there. And we would have kids get recruited and get signed at those unsigned senior events in December, January. And that's a really good time, again, to throw some money at some showcases where I'm going to get seen by 300 schools, or I'm going to get a profile and get seen by 40 schools in person. Those are good uses of your budget. The other thing is email everyone in existence. Email everyone. and I'll talk about this in a second, but this is the thing that you do. If you had $0 to spend on recruiting, but you were very motivated and hardworking about it, you'd be totally fine. So remember, you don't have to spend a dime. Obviously, you have to play baseball, you have to buy the equipment, all that stuff, and being on a better travel organization that does help you with recruiting is helpful. Don't get me wrong, but you can do all this yourself. You don't need a recruiting profile on the web. You don't need to go to these big showcases. You could do a lot of this stuff yourself, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. So, what do you do? Dun dun dun. Number one, wait till he's ready. That's the biggest thing. This is the first step that you should not ignore. Wait till your son is ready, or if you're a player yourself, wait till you're ready. 1B, if not ready, spend all your budget getting your kid ready. Spend the money to help them improve on their weaknesses and continue to maintain their strengths. And you also need to find someone who will be honest with you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've talked with a high school coach and we're just talking about players and whatever. And he's like, man, like I got this kid and I'm trying to help him with recruiting, but he's like, I want to go to this D1 and this D1 and this D1. And it's like, look, he's not a D1 player. And like they have to break it to the family. It's like, and a good way of talking about this is like, I remember I was talking to this one coach in Bloomington Normal, and he had one kid committed to a D1 who was a junior, and this other kid who was like, I want to go D1. And he was like, look, listen, you know this kid who committed to a D1. He's your teammate. He's like the best kid in this whole like 50-mile radius, right? And he didn't get any scholarship money to go D1. So put that in perspective. It's really hard. 2% of high schoolers go D1. So have someone who can honestly give you an evaluation and also say, hey, this is where you need to be. This is like what you need to work on. Get your speed up. You make too many errors. Your curveball is not good enough. That's why scouts probably aren't interested, or your command's not good enough. Getting that useful information to bolster your weaknesses is very important. Number 2, when you're ready, and of course you can do this before you're ready. It costs you nothing. Create a 2 to 4 minute video. Obviously, iPhones are wonderful. It's not 1995, so this is pretty darn easy for you now. You can get regular video, slow motion video. I always recommend doing it horizontally instead of vertical, so you don't have the black bars on it. But get a 2 to 4 minute video. Don't put any music in it. Don't make it weird. Doesn't be like Rocky. But get their mechanics, and what I mean is like get them big in frame if you can, so they can really see, not from like 100 feet away. They can see your pitching mechanics. They can see your swing. So what I recommend is get some footage in a batting cage environment. So son's a hitter, get him pretty up close so he fills the screen hitting. So you can, they can see his swing hitting off a tee. Great. I'm a scout. I like this swing because I can see it clearly. Their mechanics. Get a couple from the front, couple from the side, couple from the rear. Great. I can see this kid's pitching mechanics. I can tell you very clearly if I like them or I don't like them. Then, also good for the batting cage environment, hitting off a tee. Does someone have a radar gun or pocket radars, or there's a radar thing on the wall like we had at our academy? They can easily see he hits 92 off the tee. Great. Very clear information. They can very easily see you throw 87 off the mound. Wonderful. They can see how hard your curveball is, your changeup, how fast your changeup is. They can see the movement on it. So get some video from behind or in front. From behind is better to see movement on pitches. And then get a little bit of game footage, because as a hitter, you can really only hit in the cage, like throwing into the net. Like you can show your arm strength that way, but really get some ground ball game footage. Get some, all right, he hits a double. Let me see him run around the bases. So they can just see how they move. They can see, man, he looks like a good athlete. That footage is tougher because it's farther away, and phones don't do that well when it's farther away. So here's one tip I would give you. Obviously I have a camera that's webcam here. I have a second camera. If one day I have a kid and he's on the recruiting trail, you bet I'll be the dad in the stands with a big zoom lens, because you can get a used DSLR camera on eBay or any of these used sites, Facebook Marketplace or Meta Marketplace. Mark Zuckerberg is the worst. You can get a used DSLR, a cheap zoom lens, and get some amazing footage of your kid in the game, playing shortstop, in center field, on the mound. And now for $250, the cost of a used DSLR camera, you have really good footage. You can zoom in, and then you can resell it used. Essentially, you borrow it. My first YouTube videos, I bought a camera used when I was like starting to get better and I didn't want that one anymore. I sold it, and it was like a push. Like I basically used the camera for a year because I bought it used and then resold it for about the same price. Very easy to do, right? So I would definitely recommend that if you're a go-getter and you want to get really good, and I guess because this stuff all matters, good footage is a good presentation. Just like if you watch a speaker and they're dressed really clean and sharp, they got a great suit on, everything sounds wonderful. You're going to think more of that speaker than the person with the exact same message in an alternate universe who's dressed kind of sloppily, who you can't hear them very well, right? So first impressions matter. So if you want to invest in some stuff like some a little bit of camera equipment, I highly recommend doing that. Number 3, then you take this video and you email it to everyone. Do not email it just to D1 schools. Here's the thing. They will all read it. When I was the go-between between the University of Louisville, who was interested in one of our freshman kids, one of our other kids from like our sophomore team happened to email University of Louisville, and because the guy had a relationship with me, he asked me about this other kid. He's like, "Hey, this other kid emailed me. Like, is he like a Louisville caliber player?" And I was like, "No." And it didn't matter, obviously. Like, no one badmouthed him or anything, but it was like Louisville read his email. Like, that's the takeaway here. This kid was not Louisville player. He was a good player. I think he's probably playing college baseball somewhere, but he wasn't a Louisville caliber. But the point is, they read all those emails. So you need to cast a big wide net. So if you only email D1s, you might not get any responses back because you might be a sophomore and you might be D1 quality in 2 years, but you're not there yet. But you want to cast a net and email every level, schools that you could be interested in. So if you play in Massachusetts, email schools in Massachusetts. If you would never play Massachusetts, don't email anyone in Massachusetts. Why would you email schools you wouldn't want to go to? So think geographically, and then email schools that would be realistic fits for you, and just start to see who comes back to you and who will invite you to their camp or will actually send you a response. Invites to camps are very common. So if you email University of Florida, they probably won't respond, but they probably will send you, because they're going to add you to the email list. They'll send you a camp invite, and then maybe you go to their camp, and kids do get signed into those camps. It's a real thing. However, they're going to send that to everybody. So if you email, LSU, and they send you a camp invite, you're not being recruited by LSU. They're just giving you a camp invite. There's thanks. We'd love to see you come here. You clearly like our program. We'd love you to come down and see what we're about. Some kids do get signed there. Remember, if you throw 90 LSU and they send you a camp invite and you go throw 90 at LSU camp, hey, maybe you get to go to LSU if you're really good. You don't know. Anyway, just keep that in mind. When you get a real human response back, that's when you're onto something. So if you throw 95 and you email LSU and they're like, "Hey, we loved your video. When can we talk on the phone?" That's like, hey, there's some interest. Okay. But again, email a lot of schools, and this takes work. And let me remind you all, parents, you can help with the research. You can help collecting data. You can make a spreadsheet. You cannot send the email. The kids need to send the email, and the kids need to write them. They'll know when the kid didn't write. Like, unfortunately, kids don't have great grammar. So if it's like pristine and it sounds like it was written by a Deloitte consultant, they're going to know, right? So anyway, you can help with the research, but if your kid's not motivated to do this work, they're probably not cut out for college baseball. Or you just need to, again, you need to be in the background, and the kid needs to send it from his email. Parents, do not email a college ever. They don't care about your opinion, because it's a very biased opinion, because you love your kids, and that's wonderful that you love them, but no one cares about your opinion of your kid's baseball ability. And it's going to turn them off because they think, okay, mom is a little too involved. I want to hear from the kid, not mom and dad. So just understand that. In this video, put your skills videos, upload YouTube, upload it to Vimeo. I would say keep it unlisted, which means it's not publicly found, but you can make it public. It's totally fine as long as there's no like sensitive information. I wouldn't put your phone number or your personal email on there. Unlisted just means that the link works for anyone, but it's like searchable, just so you know. But you can put that video anywhere you want. Then you can just put the link in the email. That's great. And your grades, height, weight, metrics in the description of this video, they're already in there. So you can open it up right now. I put other videos that were related to this talk, including there's one where you can download a free template email where I wrote an email for you. And it's just like a boilerplate, but that gives you a good idea of like what an email is like. So if you want to do that, that's in the description below. And then obviously, when you're ready, so you've done this, you're going to get some emails back. All right, so say 5 schools emailed you back. You probably can't go to all camps. but you probably want to pick a couple, right? So this is why, parents, you want to save that money, because you don't want to be in a position where you spent $500 as a eighth grader, as a freshman, as a sophomore, and now as a junior, your kid's got 5 schools that he really wants to go see. Like, say the Kentucky area, maybe wants to go see like Bellarmine and wait, I thought I knew Kentucky better than I do. I don't know, but say there's like 5 schools that you'd really want to go see, like go see the campus. They're kind of interested to have you on there, but it's going to be like, you know, a night in the hotel, a long day of driving. The camp costs 150, whatever. Say it's $500 a pop to get there, stay, and come back for all 5 camps. That's $2,500. It's a lot of money. That's why you don't want to blow your budget early, because you want to have those reserves where it's like, you know what, let's do it. We saved up, we were frugal, let's go, and we'll hit them all, right? You want to make sure, because it could get really pricey, especially if you fly somewhere. A lot of kids, you know, they want to go, like, hey, I'd like to go see a school in the Washington D.C. area or in California. That's $1,000 trip, one school, right? So that's why you want to save and be frugal before you're ready, because when you're ready, you want to do it if you want to do it. And especially if they're going to be out of state, you got to visit there and you got to see the campus and you got to meet the coaches. And it's a very big commitment. Did I cover everything on that slide? Yeah. So number 5, after you've done this, who's responded to you? Who's interested? Again, human emails is important. I've been live since 7:30, but this will be on replay. So obviously, if you showed up late, yeah. Let's see, Dingle. That's a weird chat name. Make your video short, easy to upload. Post them on one site for one coach, see with one click. Yeah, good info there. Let me. I'll show some of the stuff that this person. Most of your camp invites are money makers for the coaches. Yep, that's true. GPA is huge in recruiting. Yep, that's true. Doesn't matter much. Grew by 30, 40 schools, a few D1s, mainly D3. Yeah, that's all great info. So very true. And look, just because these college camps are money makers, quote unquote, doesn't mean that they're done in bad faith. This is true. If you don't know the structure in college baseball, that's a good point. I'll pull this back up here again. Where was it? Here. D1 head coaches are paid. They usually have one paid assistant. I think they might have a third paid assistant now. But in general, like the NCAA is the worst. Like the NCAA is such a corrupt, ridiculous organization. Like we figured this out. Like players are going to start to get paid a little bit now. The NCAA has just been a monster forever. Why they can't allow more assistant coaches to be paid is beyond anyone's comprehension. But many of the assistants are unpaid. They're volunteers or they get paid almost nothing. And so they get paid like 20 grand as like a lump sum from a big D1. So when you go to that camp, say it's $150 and they have 200 kids, that's 30 grand that they're going to pay their employees with. Yes, it is a money maker in the sense, but that doesn't mean your kid's not going to have a good time. Doesn't mean he's not going to interact with the coaches. He's going to get to see the big thing. So again, these are lower costs than these big showcases. And yes, they like I said, if you email a big school, they're going to send you a camp invite. So just don't be naive thinking that you're being recruited when you get this camp invite. You just need to make an informed decision whether you're actually being recruited or if this is just, again, the generic camp invite that everyone gets. So just understand that. Also, Troy, great injection here into this conversation. There are a couple Twitter accounts. Can someone remind me? I know it's Rob Friedman, Pitching Ninja's Twitter account, but what is the Twitter account that you tweet at and then they send it around? It's a really great resource. I'm glad you brought that up. If you can put in the chat, let me know. But there's a Twitter account that if you have a video of yourself, you at the Twitter account, you say, hey, I'm Dan, I throw 87 and blah, blah, I'm a sophomore, here's where I go. Like so many college schools follow that account that they're just like rummaging through it, looking at videos. It's like a free recruiting tool. It's really great. I'm glad they started that. But hopefully someone will put that in the chat. If they do, I'll throw it up here. But that's also a great resource. And then you just need to continue to stay in touch. So if say it's Flatground. Yep. Flatground app. Flatground. There it is. Yeah. So you'll find it. So if you go on Twitter, search for Flatground. I think it's at Flatground app is the is the handle. But that's also a great resource. Everything I said still applies, but that's a great way to get seen by a lot of coaches, because then they're just scanning through that feed of Twitter posts, looking at videos of players. Again, which is why you need to keep the videos short. So like a minute, 2 minutes, maybe you have two versions, like a short and a long version. The short version goes on Twitter. Anyway, if a school's interested in you, say they're like, hey, we liked you, like we like your video, let's keep in touch. We're going to try to come watch you play in the summer. If they're really local, then maybe they can see you play in high school ball. Send them an email every month and be like, hey, coach, here's how I'm doing. You know, I hit 2 doubles last game. Like, I'm throwing really well. Like, keep up with them. If they say keep in touch, like actually keep in touch. It shows interest. It's respectful. And again, you got to remember that college coaches are very busy people. And if you're making their job easier by sending them information, it's great. It's good. Like, keep up with them. Don't be a pest, but just send them a periodic update and say, you know, like, hey, I'm really interested. Obviously, I want to make sure you still know that I'm doing really well, and blah blah blah. Here's my schedule. Right? Keep them up to date. Give info. And if you're this kid that they keep being impressed by, that you keep up with them, you send them new whatever. That's a good thing. You're front of mind, right? So stay in front of mind. And when you get emails back or no one emails you back, send more out and start to figure out who wants to dance with you. That's kind of how it works. The other thing that's important is to ask for help. So coaches, instructors, people who know you, who have connections, who can vouch for you. So if you had someone like me and you're like, hey, Dan, I've sent all these emails out. My high school coach has sent a bunch of emails out for me. Can you send an email to this coach for me? Whatever. Or can I put you as a reference? Whatever it is. And then also ask people that you trust for evaluations and stuff like that. Because again, you need someone to be honest with you, even if it stings. Like, hey, dude, they're not emailing you back because you have one pitch. Your slider sucks, your changeup sucks, and you don't really work on them, do you? No. So we need to fix that. You have to have a second pitch. This is what you need to do if you want people to be interested in you. You throw 84 and you have no legitimate second pitch. That's why they're not emailing you back. That's a hard conversation that stings, but it's really useful because now you have the information you need to make a plan. Like, okay, I need to develop a second pitch. And yeah. Kyle says, I've sent hundreds of emails and believe there's no point. Kyle, who are you? Let me see here. Kyle, I'm throwing 87 off the mound as a sophomore and don't understand why I'm not getting looked at. All the schools tell me on the phone, hey, you're a sophomore, so they are not necessarily going to fly out to see a sophomore right away. Also, you might not be as good as you think you are. Maybe your bullpen video shows you being kind of wild, or maybe your off-speed stuff isn't that good, or I don't know. There's lots of factors. When you start to get frustrated and say, understand why blank, that's exactly my point, is that you need to find someone who can be objective with you and say, this is why maybe no one's emailing you back, or let me look at your email, or probably something's wrong, or maybe you're just not as good as you think you are. And a lot of kids can hit 87, but it looks very max effort, or they're very wild. Again, this is where I talk about being a good baseball player. So I appreciate that that comment, but yeah, it's difficult to. That's also true that there are different rules where they can't necessarily call you back on the phone. That's also a complicated issue. They can't respond to you directly email. There's a lot of other recruiters. They're beyond the scope today, but remember, there's just a lot that's difficult about this, because this is the hardest step with this, is being honest about your ability. Because sometimes people don't like what they don't want to hear, right? It's if you really think you're good, just get in front of other people that can be honest with you and be like, look, I want you to tell me, am I as good as I think I am? Or what do I need to do better to get people to respond? And sometimes the answer will be like, nothing. They'll email you eventually. Just stay the course. You're doing fine. You look good. There's nothing too young, or maybe they can't contact you yet. Troy, I appreciate you. Like this, my fella, Troy is pretty up on the recruiting game. So thanks for helping here in the chat. Yeah, a lot of recruiting rules that can dictate whether they can call you back or not, all that sort of stuff. That's why, as I mentioned before, I was the go-between between the University of Louisville and this player because they couldn't directly speak. It would have been illegal. So they were doing things the right way. They would talk to me. I would relay a message. They would talk to him, blah, blah, blah. So that happens. And it was just like, hey, can you invite him to our camp or whatever? So these things are complicated. So just remember that that's part of it too. But again, being honest about your ability is one of the things that I know a lot of parents and players struggle with because they start to look at comparable players. So like my son throws 85 and he's not signed. No one's emailing him back. Why are these other? I look through the rankings for the state for PBR, and there's all these other kids who throw 85 and they're signed. Like, why are they signed and my kid's not signed? It's like, well, it's because your kid's not a very good pitcher, and those kids are actually really good pitchers, and they also throw 85. Like, there's usually some reason, but a lot of times people don't have the expertise to know, or they don't want to know. They just sort of want the answer that they want to hear. So again, when you're old enough and they can respond to you, if they're not responding, that just might be an indication that they don't think you're right for them. So if you email 100 D1 schools as a junior and no one responds, you're probably not a D1 player. If you email 10 D1s, 10 D2s, 10 D3s, and 9 D3s and 3 D2s and 0 D1s, you're probably like a mid D2 player, right? Maybe there's some D1 that might want you, and there's probably some D2s, but like mostly D3s say that you're mostly a D3 player, D2 player, right? So it's important just to try to understand the gauge interest. That's why you should cast a big net. So keep improving. Obviously, development is still huge. If you're not getting the response that you want, or you really want to play D1 ball, obviously you can go for 2 years and develop for 2 more years. That's a great route for a lot of players. I have a kid pitching at Tulane right now who he really wanted to go D1. He wasn't quite there at a high school, and he had 2 good years at junior college, and he's pitching for Tulane. This will be his last in there. You can look him up. His name's Clifton. He's a great kid, hard worker, good pitcher. So, there's a developmental route for everyone, and there really is a place to play for everyone too. So I've had kids go on to play in junior colleges that through 76. They weren't great schools, like they weren't great teams, but they got to play some college baseball, and they got 2 years more to extend the clock and see if they can maybe transfer somewhere, and some of them did. So, again, there's a school for everyone, and you don't have to throw 90 to play D1 baseball. Because again, I'll go to a Georgetown game in the spring, GW game, and I guarantee you I will see upper 80s for almost every pitcher that steps on the field. That's how it is. It's a little bit of a misnomer what's going on social media. People going 90 poo, 80 poo, like it's really hard to throw every pitch at 90 or above. It's still very hard to do that. You see it in the pros. You don't see it as often in college. You see it more than you used to, but it's still really hard to sit 90 and above. Q&A. So we have made it. Kyle, yeah, obviously, like, I appreciate the question. Let me single you out a little bit. You stay the course, man. At the very least, just keep doing things well. If you throw 87 in softball, you have a very bright future. So you just got to keep improving. And again, if you can, I know kids these days are a little more sensitive than they used to be, but ask for the hard truth. It'll give you a roadmap of what to improve on. And again, I've had a lot of those hard conversations. Some kids handle them better than others. Some kids want to quit afterwards. Some kids are really motivated because like, okay, now I know. I don't have to waste time doing other stuff. I have to waste time sitting at home being frustrated, confused why no one wants to talk to me. I know it's my slider or it's my changeup. I'm too wild. So I know what to do now. And that's empowering. So again, there's got to be someone in your life who will be honest and just preface it. Tell me the truth. Why aren't schools emailing me back? Or why aren't D1s or D2s or whatever? Where's the interest? So, okay, folks. So let's do Q&A. I will rummage back through these. And if you have new questions or an old question that you really want me to see now, it's a great time to throw it in the chat. But I'm gonna ramble through this and see here a little bit. I got number one. If you've made it here, it's like exactly an hour, which is astonishing. Yeah. So this isn't much a question, but I'm gonna go with Brian earlier. Why is that not showing all the way? Does that help? Okay, let me read this whole question because it looks like it's not completely coming up on the screen. So his son's listed as a top prospect in the 23 class, which means he would be a 2022 is a senior, 2023 is a junior, right? He's thinking D1 JUCO over D1 programs to play right away. I you know I think there's a lot of security in going to D1 if you have the opportunity over a JUCO. I think playing right away can at times be overrated. There's a lot of, again, if you can get to a good program, even if you don't play that much as a freshman, the developmental aspect compared to the vast majority of JUCOs is going to be huge. Now there are some JUCOs, and I wrote a long article about this, and I made a long video about junior colleges as well. Junior college has the widest continuum, the widest range of facilities and coaching ability and playing fields and all that. There are some junior college that are phenomenal. I had a buddy, we played in pro ball together. He coached at San Jacinto, which is in Texas. He had like 11 pitchers that threw 90 or above. This was like 6 years ago or something. They are legit. Like I think Roger Clemens went to San Jack. Like they get lots of players. They get a lot of bounce backs. If you go to University of Texas, good enough to play there, or like you show up and like maybe get cut, they'll go to San Jack. So they get a lot of like bounce back players who are really good from big D1s. But anyway, San Jack was a team, and they probably still are, that could just like beat up a lot of D1 programs. However, they are a very tiny minority in junior college. There is a lot of junior colleges that are extremely mediocre. There are a lot of junior colleges that are downright terrible and embarrassing, and we get by high school teams in some cases. So it just varies widely. In D1, the variance is much smaller. The worst D1 can still beat a big D1 almost any of the day of the year. Even this happens where Fresno State won the College World Series. Stony Brook almost won it, or did they win it? I can't remember. Stony Brook Conference, but you have smaller D1s that can compete because if you can pitch and field and you can hit, you can hang with anybody on 3-game series, right? So understand that. Yeah, I'll talk about JUCO. Troy, that's a good question. Clicked the wrong one. That's also a good question though. Let me finish my spiel on junior college, and I'll pivot here. So with junior college, you just have to really know what you're getting into. So there are some junior colleges that have great facilities, great coaches, great developmental tracks, and they're really good at pushing players onward to 4-year schools. There are other JUCOs that are not like that. So you really have to do your homework. Saying I went JUCO is very, like, I don't even know what that means compared to like I went D1. If you say I went D1, we have a pretty good idea that you had a good strength coach, good weight room, good support staff, good, like, D1 programs are just better funded. So back to the other question. If you're pretty good, do you want to go to D1 or maybe spend some years at junior college or a lower tier in general and play right away? It's really up to you. If you want to go and play pro ball one day, the numbers don't lie. Out of the draft picks every year from Major League Baseball, obviously, it's like 95% come from Division I amongst college teams. A large chunk comes, a good chunk comes from D2, and a good chunk comes from JUCO. The very smallest chunk comes from D3. And that comes down to scouts, having to be time efficient. Like the talent just typically is not there at D3 baseball. Not to say they're not good players, because they are, but you don't see many D pitchers sitting 92 with command of a good breaking ball and an open pitch. You just don't see it very much. So most of the time, the D3 draft picks are catchers and pitchers. There's very few position players that get drafted from D3 because scouts have a tough time figuring out, like, you're hitting against pitchers that throw 84 to 87 most days, or 86. I don't know if you can handle pro ball. Like if you hit 330 hitting off pitchers that throw 85 on average, what does that mean in pro ball where you now have to use a wooden bat and you're going to face 92 every day? But if you hit 330 in the SEC or the Pac-12 or the Big Ten, they have a pretty good idea that you're going to do okay in pro ball, right? They can scout your abilities, because the ability in big D1 baseball is very close to professional. It's not professional, but it's clear. So understand that they're going to spend most of their scouting efforts at the better Division I schools. They still do their diligence. Like, scouts are, again, very time efficient, busy people. There's scouts at almost every D1 school, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so you're going to get a lot of opportunity. And again, if you can succeed in SEC or the ACC, it says a lot. So it depends what track you want to be on. Obviously, if you go to college, you do 2 years there, you can go on to a D1 and get drafted all the same. But the developmental aspect and the resources and the thing is typically the best at D1. There are some phenomenal coaches at every level. So don't misunderstand me. I mean, I know I'll call out Ryan Copenhagen or Ryan Copeland from, man, a brain fart. Ryan Copeland from University of Illinois Springfield. They're D2. They win like 45 games every year. They're phenomenal at churning out great players because Cope was a D1 pitcher and a pro guy himself. He just happens to really like being at at the helm of his D2 program. So again, there are great programs, great coaches, great at all levels. Just the most of it is concentrated on, and then there's less of it at the lesser levels, but it's still there for sure. I'm going to move on there, but that helped a little bit. Maybe it didn't. Let's see. This was a good question from Brian. Does the performance of your high school team have an impact on your attractiveness to scouts? Not that much, but when you have a team with lots of good players on it, it's going to bring more scouts games in general. But again, so you can get sort of be a tag along where they're here to watch your shortstop play and you're playing first. So you get 4 bats in front of that college coach, right? If you impress them, wonderful. If your team goes over, you win 2 games, you go 2-22 in the high school season, no one's going to unsolicited come to school. And it's going to be tougher. I think the bigger thing being on a really bad high school team is that culture in general tends to pull you down. When you're on a better team and you know how you have to really fight for playing time and you really have to fight to stay in the lineup and it's a better cultural environment where everyone thinks, the rising tide lifts all ships at better programs. So I think that's more the effect than anything else. Because a lot of the recruiting stuff, yes, you want your high school coach to help you and vouch for you and do all that stuff, but you can email everyone. It doesn't matter if you go to Clown College in the middle of rural, Saskatchewan. If you send a video and you're good, they'll be like, hey, all right, like come down to our camp. Like they might not hike up to Saskatchewan, but like if you're good, you've got a chance. So ultimately, if you're good, you might have to cast a wider net and you might have to work a little harder to get yourself out there if you're on a bad school. Or a high school team that doesn't perform very well, but it's not really going to have that big of an impact. You'll have to be more hardworking about it than if you're at a big school where there's lots of reasons for a scout to want to come and ask your head coach who he's got and who else. That's kind of the thing. Like when you have a good program, scouts will call you, be like, "Hey Dan, who do you guys got this year? I'm looking for a second baseman, 2024 class. Do you have anybody?" That's a really nice thing to have. And if your high school team is junk, probably not many people are making that call to your head coach. So take that for what it's worth. Let me scan here a little more. Okay, so recruiting process from JUCO to a 4-year school. So Troy, do you mean like when you play JUCO, how do you then, after your 2 years, get to the next program? Let me know in the chat, and then I'll come back to your. I'll come back to yours. Yeah. So you have such a bizarre YouTube name here, but you've got good comments. Your son's team won the D3 national championship. 2 kids drafted, but D1 and JUCO are 90. Yeah, that's true. If you look up the numbers, it doesn't lie. I think I did a video on this in the past because again, it's an important thing in understanding what your future is. So we had a kid a couple years ago who he was fringe D1 at the very end of his high school season. I think he got offered to walk on to 1 D1. And that is that versus went to a D3 and a great player. I think he's had a good time. I think he's graduated by now. We lost touch a little bit, but the one reason you might try to go no money into that D1 is because then again, you're there in a really good program with resources. You might have a tough time seeing the playing field. But if you can see the playing field and you get into the starting lineup, you have a real chance to get drafted if you can succeed at that level. Whereas in D3, even if you succeed at that level, you're probably not getting drafted because you don't play as much baseball. The resources are lesser to get development. You have to be a lot harder working on your own. and others aren't going to push you as much. It's harder when you're the best player on the team to keep pushing, but when you're at a pretty big time school where everyone's getting better every year, and you see kids getting taken off and getting drafted, it really motivates everybody. So it's just understanding the track that you're on. If you really want to be on the drafted track one day, and of course you don't control that. Like if you're good enough, you're good enough. If you're not, But if you really want to try to play pro ball and you don't have a D1 offer as a senior, you probably want to go JUCO for 2 years and then see if you can transfer to a D1 program if you are like desperate to play pro ball, because going D3 it's just probably not going to work out unless you're a pitcher or catcher. D2 is it's more guys get drafted at a D2, but again, everyone's different. But yeah. Ben says every year. Okay, Troy, I'll come back to your question. People say email schools and go to showcases. There has to be more. Not really, honestly. Ultimately, they've got to know you exist. Then you've got to go to them, which typically means go to their school's camp. And then they've got to play in a game, which means they're going to come to you probably in summer ball. So there's not more to it than that. They need to know you, see you, and be interested. Then they need to get eyes on you at least once. And that could first time be in a game, but it's probably not. It's probably going to be at their camp. And then they got to see it happen in a game. That's the process. In a sense, that is the process. So it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. They need to know you exist. Okay, so recruiting process from a JUCO to a 4-year. This one is complicated. I'll tell you a story. I'm actually going to this kid's wedding in a month. He's 25 now. I was on a bus my 3rd year pro ball and a local junior college. It was his sophomore year, so his last year, and he didn't have anywhere to go. And he hadn't had a great first year. He was like kind of hurt a little bit. He was also a freshman. He just like was trying to figure it out. Second year, he was still like had a nagging injury and just like didn't play that well, but he had a really good glove. I think he was hitting like 240. And I'm like, hey, Morgan, you're not that good. This Merc, just so you understand, like at some point you got to be good at baseball. I'm like, right? He's like, yeah, I know. I'm like, okay, I love you. So make some calls, but I can't lie to them. Like, why did you play? Why did you play so bad? He's like, I was kind of hurt. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, all right, well, so I'm like, send me a list of 10 schools that you want to go to. I started at the top at the very best school, and I called him, and the head coach picked. I told him about this kid. I was like, hey, he hasn't had a great year. He's a great kid, super glove, middle infielder, and he's a hard worker. He's going to like be a great character guy. You're going to love him, blah, blah, blah. That school took him. It was like that easy. Now, here's the thing. His head coach doing this for him as a junior college coach, you know that your school is going to do better and get better high school talent when you can say to these kids, we get kids placed into D1 or into not just D1, but into 4-year schools afterwards. Obviously, everyone wants to go D1, but you want to go to JUCO and then get placed and move on to a good 4-year school, whatever that means to you. So it behooves the junior college coach to essentially be their recruiting help. And most of them are. And again, it comes that same thing where if I run a great JUCO team and we do really well every year, D1 coaches are calling me. They're like, hey, Dan, we need a lefty. We need a bullpen lefty. Who do you got? We need him next year. Or, hey, we need a shortstop for 2 years from now. Do you got anybody? You want to come look at someone? I'm be like, yeah. Like I'm like a drug dealer or something. I don't know, whatever. Like I got what you want, or maybe I don't. But good junior colleges are connectors, and they're fielding those calls, and then they're giving people like, yeah, come watch us. We'll be here. I'll get some video. Like the head coach needs to do that, because then when they're placing guys at big schools, it becomes easy for them to recruit good high school talent. So like if I'm like, hey, yeah, you thinking about coming to our junior college? Well, we got one kid who now plays for the University of Texas. We got another kid who plays for the University of Houston. We got a kid who plays for UCLA. How do those sound to you, little Timmy? They're like, that sounds good. I want to go play for UCLA. Come on, because we're going to work hard and we're going to develop you, and then we're going to do our best to get you to somewhere great. That's a really easy recruiting pitch. So, yeah, that's essentially how it works. So the junior college coach and their staff is going to take care of that for the players. Now, in the case of my kid Morgan, his coach didn't do much for him, and he also didn't play very well. So maybe his hands were tied. I don't know, but his coach didn't do a very good job. So I don't know. Every program's different. So as a parent, you need to ask, and as a player, you need to ask those programs, like, hey, where have kids gone on after playing here, and what does that process look like? How hard do you work for kids? What do they need to do? What do you do? What is that process going to look like? Because we know my son's going to be worried when he hits his sophomore year and he's got to find a new place to go. It's like you have to do the recruiting process over again, but there's not showcase really. It's not like that. It's just going to be like a word of mouth, and there's going to be a lot of trust. So again, people trust me that, like, I'm not going to BS them. I'm not going to lie. And if I'm like, yeah, this kid's good, he could start for you. Like, come out and watch him. They'll send someone to go watch, and they'll be like, yeah, he's right, because they don't want to waste anyone's time. So they're gonna heavily lean on the junior college coaches to say, can this kid pitch at my level? And with good relationships, that was going to be pretty much good enough. Then they're going to want to lay eyes on him at least once, and then that'll be that. That's kind of how it works. So how do you get to a JUCO? You're going to get signed as a senior to go to one. Same thing. Email them. Junior colleges, they're at the bottom of the barrel, not in talent necessarily. Again, I think I covered that a little bit, but junior colleges can be wonderful places to play. But they don't really have. They might have some scholarship to give. Usually, it's just academic. They're smaller schools. They're usually community colleges, so it's not like it's fancy, exciting place to go, right? So less people are excited to go to junior college for those kind of reasons. It's not going to be the flashy campus with the big football team and like that whole thing. It's a smaller college experience. A lot of times they're in places in like smaller towns that aren't as desirable. Sometimes they are. It just depends. So to go to a junior college at a high school, you just need to email them, send them video, just like anything else. But that process is going to start your senior year or before your senior, more than like your junior year. You'll get seen by junior colleges before then, and they'll probably reach out to you as like a junior and start to get you thinking about it. And there are some kids that commit to junior colleges like before the start of their senior year, or like whatever. But typically it's the senior year, but it's not hard. Just give them and send them video the same as anyone else. Let's go through here some more. Trying to spread it around. Sorry, I need like some elevator music. Here, I'll put on a weird effect for a minute, like my computer's glitching out while I'm looking through comments. Maybe we've covered most of it, and that's okay. So any other questions? I'll open it up. I'll give, since it seems like we're out of recruiting questions. Throw some more out there. I'll just go to some general ones. All right, new one. Okay. How do I define hard work? That's a good question. I'll stop glitching now. How do I define hard work? I don't know. I think when you see it, and I feel like when you've given it. I don't know that I have a better answer than that. But okay, here's a good topic to go through. Decommitting, and this is what I want to talk about with regard to big schools and early commitments and all this stuff. Here's what everyone thinks: all these big D1 schools are like so great and wonderful, and they are, whatever. However, there are a lot of schools, and they've cracked down this on a little bit because they don't allow schools to give just like book scholarships. Like, you now have to give 0% or 25% scholarship at a minimum to play at a D1. And they did that to stop schools from essentially hoarding all the good players. So if I played for the University of the United States, and we're like College World Series caliber every year, and I'm going to take like every great kid in the Washington D.C. area. I'm like, hey, you want to go to the College World Series? Come on, I can't give you any money. I'll give you a book scholarship for $1,200, but come play here. I do this to every good player in the area, right? Because they all want to play for me, because they want to play for the College World Series. So, and they can say, oh, I'm going to University of the United States. And so now I have 90 kids show up at fall practice. Okay. I can't keep 90 kids. I can only keep like 30 on the roster. I remember what the current NCAA roster rules is, but it's not that big. It's like 30-ish. So I've got to get rid of 60 players. So They don't tell a lot of people this. They'll kind of gloss over and be like, "Oh yeah, you'll have a chance to fight for," whatever wording they use. They used to use a lot more. This still happens. A lot of big schools enter the fall with a lot of extra kids that they got to cut. And when I talked about San Jacinto getting a lot of bounce backs from big schools, these are those kids, bounce backs. You got to go to University of the United States of America for book scholarship or no scholarship, but you didn't make the team in the fall. So now you got to go somewhere else. Jump to a junior college. You can go right away that semester and then go about your business. So, and they also they changed the transfer rules. So if you transfer, you have to sit out a year. If you transfer within Division One, again, I don't know the nitty gritty specifics of that right now, but that's a complicated issue. So here's my thing about decommitting. I had a kid who got decommitted he signed after he verbally committed his sophomore year. Then when his senior year rolled around, he had a growth plate fracture. So he had a small growth plate issue. He had a minor surgery. And he just he was throwing 86 as a sophomore, and then he was throwing 86 as a senior. So they got a regime change. All the coaches got fired, and he had a new coaching staff come in the senior year, and he was all ready to go off to this big school. And they said, "Hey, we don't want you anymore." So now he took himself off the market for 2 years, his prime recruiting years, because he was committed to this school. And they said, "No, we're good. We don't want you anymore." So here's my thing with decommitting versus committing. The verbal commit as a sophomore is a hazardous thing because your son or you, if I'm talking to a player, you can take yourself off the market because, oh, I'm going to the University of America as a sophomore. I'm verbally committed. Well, verbal commitment isn't ironclad. They're supposed to keep you, and I don't know the specific about it, but they can get rid of you. So be cautious and ask and do your research about that. If you're one of those kids who might actually verbally commit, and figure out what the implications of it are, because it can be scary and they could renege on their commitment later on. So when players are talking about decommitting themselves, I think it goes both ways. I think loyalty is important, but sometimes I think you got to do what you need to do. So I think there's a tough line between, am I being disloyal or am I taking care of myself? Because at the end of the day, I think a college would choose their interests over yours. Every college is different. It's a hard question to answer about committing versus about decommitting when you've given a verbal commitment. Now, and you'll also know that a lot of schools will pressure you hard to commit because they act like, "Oh, you've got a week. Here's our offer. You've got a week to get back to us." And that's a lot of pressure to put on a high school kid who maybe doesn't know what he wants for his future. Maybe a year later, you're like, "I really want to go to this school because I could play there, and they have this great major. I really want to be a biologist, and they have a great biology program." I didn't know that before because what sophomore cares about biology, right? You learn about vacuoles and Golgi apparatuses. Who cares? But say something changes and you're like, "I really want to go to this baseball school now because they also have a great academic major for me. Things have changed. Decommit, like whatever, go do it." I mean, it's your academic future too. So again, I think it's a very civic question. I think you need to be as loyal as you can and stick by your word. But at the same time, um, when they're putting a lot of pressure on kids, which they do, to commit really young when they don't really know who they are or what their academic aspirations might be, when those change later on, personally, I say screw them. That's kind of where I fall. But it's a complex decision. Again, being loyal and keeping your word is important. So it's just, I don't know, it's a case by case basis. I'm not saying, Kyle, that you're better off committing later because the scholarship will be gone. If you just say, "Oh, I don't want to commit as a sophomore," when they have scholarship money for you, they're going to give that to another kid. So the money pot, they run around it's just like Halloween. "Hey, take two. We have a lot of Reese's peanut butter, but if you come back at 9:30, there's nothing there." So they give a lot of money as to sophomores, and there's not as much juniors, and there's none for like seniors typically. So you have to understand that they put these time sensitive offers out there because they can't have money tied up for a month or 2 months, because if you say no, they could have offered some other kid, but now some other school got him. Complicated thing. So recruiting is not easy for anybody. And I'm not saying it's always done in bad faith, because it's not, but sometimes there is bad faith stuff done, and it's just complicated. So it's hard. But yeah, and then there's also class issues and et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk. What else we got here? let's talk about scholarship numbers a little bit. So this was brought up. I know these get cut off; they get truncated. That is annoying, but it's always great to use the word truncated. So if you don't know, college baseball is not well being fully funded, quote unquote. In college baseball means your school has 11.7 scholarships. That's how many is allotted for a 30-person roster, essentially. So that means if you do the math, and that's spread across all four. So that's a third of a scholarship for every player if every player got an equal scholarship. So, in football, I think they have like 85 scholarships or something. So there's like essentially a full scholarship for every player on the team. Pretty much most of the women's sports, if not all of them, there's a full scholarship for every player. So if you talk to like a women's volleyball team, if they have like 8 or 9 or 10 players, every girl has a full ride to go to that school typically. That's not the case in baseball. It's very rare to give a full ride scholarship. I know there's like crazy. I live in the city, but it's very rare to get a full scholarship in baseball because, again, 11.7 divided by about 30 players on average. If you give a scholarship to one player, that means the average scholarship for everyone else is going to, like, you just don't have as much to give out. Right? It's like having a 30-kid family. If you give one kid a gigantic plate, there's less food for everyone else. So understand that big scholarship offers are rare. So if a school's bringing you 50% or 60%, that's a really big scholarship. They're not going to be able to hold that money that long. And that means they're pretty interested in you. And here's the thing about scholarship money. They, just like everyone, just like signing bonuses, just like contracts. I mean, think of Chris Davis or Ryan Howard, guys who had really big contracts in Major League Baseball. They stayed in the lineup because they're getting paid $20 million to do it. They wanted to try to get their money's worth and give them chances to become who they used to be again, right? If you get a big scholarship, 50% scholarship, there are going to be more chances to fail. So that's a good thing to remember, that schools that want to give you money, that's like, hey, we're really obviously interested in you. And obviously that seems pretty obvious, but just remember that you're going to get more chances to fail and come back from it, more chances to be injured, and they'll wait for you, and they have scholarship money tied up in you. So you just have to remember. So even if schools have an endowment where they're private or whatever, they still have a 11.7 scholarship. So just because, I'm not sure this is what you're saying. I don't think it was, but it doesn't matter if you're private or public. 11.7 is the maximum amount of scholarships you can give your team in NCAA baseball. So they can't fundraise to give people more money. They can't do any of that. They can treat you a lot better, feed you a lot more food, have a better ballpark. They can make a lot of these other peripheral perks, but they in the past can't give that. I don't know how things are going to change now that they've blown the cap off paying players. I think is great. Like, players maybe can get some money for having a big Instagram following or get some sponsorship deals or whatever. And that's certainly going to happen with some of the bigger schools, not with the small schools, but hopefully there'll be more money trickling in to help players pay for their stuff, because even if you have a scholarship, you still are eating at the dorm. Like, a lot of schools don't feed you that well. So you're like playing a double header and then you're going home free and you're like scrounging for food. This is the college reality. And this is why, I really took exception when this whole issue of should college athletes be paid. You had people who, like, silver spoon people like Tim Tebow, who from all standpoints seems like a really nice, well-meaning guy, but like, Tim Tebow doesn't speak for everyone when he's talking about, college athletics should be pure and like they shouldn't get paid. It's like, all right, Tim, I think you had plenty of money and plenty of food in your stomach, but there's a lot of kids who come from poverty to play big time D1 sports, and they legitimately don't have any money when they leave their big basketball arena or the big football arena or their big baseball stadium. They go home to their dorm and they don't have any money to buy more food, and they're at the end of the night. That's a very real reality for a lot of college athletes. And so I think this increase in pay for D1 sports, where I don't know all the rules for it, but this was a good thing, because people think, you're getting, they're Troy, I'm pretty sure that's not true. You can't give more athletic scholarship money than 11.7. There might be something else. It's probably academic money, but you can't just fund more athletic scholarships. I'm pretty sure that's not true. So I'll pull that back. No, it's got to be something else. It can't be like scholarship. That 11.7 rule applies to everybody. Um, but anyway, the reality for college sports is that it's tough, and there's also a big reason, and this is probably the last thing maybe I'll end on tonight because we're running out of time. But college sports aren't for everyone. A lot of kids will show up and they'll quit uh, because it's hard. You're up at 6 a.m. You have workouts, then you go to class at 8:30 to 1. Then you're back at the field for 3 more hours of practice. That's like the D1 life. Then you go to the dining hall afterwards, and then you're home at 7 p.m. and you got to do your homework and the next day. If your coach is really riding you and maybe you're just not into it, it's hard. So people forget that baseball is probably the hardest sport to play in college because you play so many games. You know, D1 you play 56. At D2, I think you play around 50. I don't know the exact number. At D3, it varies heavily. And D3 often don't have a whole lot of like their fall practice is much shorter than D1. Um, but you're talking about 56 games in the spring, and you're talking about daily practices in between. You get 1 day off a week, and you're having daily practices all through the fall until you go off for winter break. It's a huge time commitment, and when you're talking about like for me, I'm trying to write philosophy papers on the back of the bus driving home from some place. It's on Sunday night, and I'm like pissed off that I didn't play well, or I'm really excited because we did play well and I don't want to do homework in the bus, but I'm trying to like think hard and write a philosophy paper. Um, it's the time commitment is gigantic, especially for the spring for baseball, because again, you're playing two midweek games typically, sometimes three, and then three on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or a doubleheader, two on Saturday, two on Sunday, depending on your conference. So you're talking about 5 games a week plus another practice, and have to get 1 day off a week. That's a lot for a whole semester. And obviously, you only get 2 semesters a year. So that's half your career. You're pulling that with these huge games. And obviously, baseball has long pregame, post-game cleanup. Unless you're a big-time D1 program, you're doing your field work after the game. You're tamping the mound as a team. You're dragging the infield. That stuff, all that maintenance is often done by the players because you don't have the budget to have a grounds crew unless you're one of the top 50 schools probably. So it's a big time commitment, and a lot of kids get there. They're like, "Man, this feels like a job. I want to be a normal student," or "I hate my coach and I don't love baseball as much as I thought to do these crazy workouts and to be this committed." It's a really big thing. So just remember, it's another reason just to be relaxed with your kids' high school um, program's the wrong word, but there's another reason to be relaxed about how this all pans out for your kids and for you as players is that you don't know how it's going to go in college. You might get hurt your freshman year. You might not play your freshman year. And then that sophomore year, a kid who's better than you at your same position might get recruited and come in and he might start over you as a freshman. There's a lot of variables rather than like, oh, I'm going to LSU now and I'm going to have a great 4 years there. It's hard. It's hard to play at LSU. It's hard to play at any school and to be healthy for all 4 years, to get good grades, to get your degree, to keep your sanity, be harmonious with your coaching staff and your players. It's a really big commitment. And so just understand that when your kid gets to college, they might not play that well because not everyone can hit 300 in college. A lot of players are going to hit 250 or worse. A lot of kids by their sophomore year are going to be essentially done playing, like they're not going to field anymore because they couldn't hack it. And now they have younger players that they want to put at that position. Some kids are going to have too much schoolwork where they feel like they just can't do both. A lot of things are going to change. So when parents are like crazy and players are like crazy about this college, just remember, like, you don't know how it's going to work out in college. It works out great for some players, and most players will stick it out and will have a good time. But there's a lot of variables at play because it's such a rigorous schedule, no matter what division you play. And it's a very different animal. And it's at the tail end of what has now become a real rigorous travel ball schedule, a really rigorous high school schedule. A lot of kids just get burned out and like, man, I've been playing baseball like nonstop. We've been playing 60, 70, 80 games a summer since I was 12. Now here I am away from home and I'm still like all baseball all the time. I just want to like do my own thing for a little while and like feel like I enjoy college because you don't get a spring break. You don't get to go all the big football games depending on your schedule. Like, so again, there's a lot of like college is a wonderful experience. It's very rewarding. It's super fun. I mean, you want to play college baseball if you can, but it's a lot and it won't be right for everyone. So just understand that when you put so much of your heart and soul and feel so anxious and stressed about college baseball, there's a lot of kids that will go, they'll quit by their freshman year, or they'll find out it wasn't for them, or they'll get cut, or it'll be over. So just understand that it's not as big a deal as you think it is, and to just relax, and it'll work out the way it'll work out. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of perspective. But it's the day in the life as a college baseball player is it's quite a thing. It's pretty amazing, but also pretty tough. So hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to wrap up here. I really appreciate the very thoughtful questions. A really good discussion. A lot of people added a lot of great value, that the things that I forgot, overlooked, or maybe didn't know, because there's a lot of nitty gritty little details that are hard to stay up with. So thank you for the comments and for participating in the chat, because I feel like everyone here who participated in the chat really made this better. So thanks so much. I'm going to sign off, but again, if you have anything else, leave comments to the video even after I'm done. I almost all my YouTube comments. And if you ever have a question, shoot me an email. So thanks again for watching, and I'll